All right, Shabbos, good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsor, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev, Sammy and Malka Esterson, for dedicating all of the shiurim and droshos this month in memory of their parents, Yitzchak, Laib ben Aharon HaKohen, Sarah Rachel bas Baruch Avraham, and Hinda bas Henech Efraim. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshamas will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. We thank our week of learning sponsors, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating the shiurim this week in honor of the birth of a grandson, Rabbi Henech Morris, Rosh Kollel of the Columbus Community Kollel, and his wife Chaya, born to Isaac and Esther Morris of Baltimore, Mazel Tov. And we have a new week of learning sponsor, Michael and Sarah Lippman and family from Los Angeles, California, in honor of Philip Sandfield's Siyum Hashas. Philip is a long-time listener of ours from across the country, who is Baruch Hashem making his Siyum Hashas this Shabbos. This Shabbos. I just want to point out how incredible it is that, well, let me finish the dedication. So from the Lippmans, may Philip and his wife Judy merit to make many more Siyumim and continue to inspire us all with their Torah and Maisim Tovim. Mazel Tov. I just want to point out, this is Baruch Hashem. First, Ira completing Shas, right? Cycle of Shas. Philip Sandfield, like what a time we live in, where the completion of Shas is an attainable goal. This was not one generation ago. This was not the case. This was not the case. Who finished Shas? Yechidei Skula, certain individuals, Talmidei Chacham, incredible Talmidei Chachamim. Now, Baruch Hashem, all of us, first of all of us have the ability to become incredible Talmidei Chachamim. Yirtzeh Hashem, all of us one day. And this achievement, this goal is within reach. It's Mameshech Yonu v'Kimanu v'Giyonu Lazman Hazeh. So Mazel Tov to Philip and an incredible Yashikach for the inspiration as well. So with that, let us begin. We have a beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is daf Zayin 7. Zebi, welcome back. Good to see you. Today's daf is daf Zayin. We're starting on Vav Amud Beis 6b, and we are picking up 6 lines up from the bottom. Beautiful Gemara. Rabbi Avo. At what point in time do we begin to make the bracha over rain? So we'll say, we began this yesterday, and the Gemara over here is talking about, what do you mean, what bracha are we talking about over the rain? Remember, this is not Mashi Bracha Merda Geshem, this is not the same Talmud bracha. If you take a look at Rashi says, Me'im Masayim Bevarchan Al Gishamim, Perak HaRoeh, 4 lines up from the bottom in Rashi, Amrinon, Al Gishamim Omer HaTov V'Hametiv. We'll say, see, interestingly enough, that the Gemara Mesachas Brachas brings down that on rain you make the bracha of Hatov V'Hametiv, which is the bracha that says Hashem is good and bestows good. Well, so I just point out just very quickly, there are 2 brachas that kind of live in the same orbit: the bracha of Shechianu and the bracha of Hatov V'Hametiv. How do you know when to make which one? So Shechianu is on something that is good for you, but really only you. Hatov V'Hametiv is the bracha that is made of something that is good for you and for others as well. Just an interesting idea. There's a fascinating discussion in the contemporary poskim. When you get a new car, what bracha should you make? Should you make a Shechianu or should you make Hatov V'Hametiv? So of course it depends. If you're going to give rides to people and help people out and go ultimately to take your car to do tzedakah ma'asim tovim, so then you make a Hatov V'Hametiv. If you're just using it to show off to your neighbors, then it might just be a shechianu, right? So again, depending on what you plan on doing with the new automobile. But I'm just pointing out, according to Rashi over here, the bracha we're talking about is the bracha Tov V'Hametiv. Now we're going to see the maskana of the Gemara is talking about actually a different bracha. But again, Tov V'Hametiv. So the Gemara Mai Mevarich, Rabbi Yehuda. Although interestingly enough, Rashi's approach is difficult because the Gemara makes no mention of Tov V'Hametiv, as you're going to see. So Rabbi Yehuda Marav, Modim Anachnu Lach. Modim Anachnu Lecha Hashem Elokeinu Al Kol Tipa Utipa Shehoradata Lanu. Modim Anachnu Lecha Baruch, we have incredible gratitude for every drop that you have brought down for us. People say, do you understand what this bracha means? This is the bracha the Gemara says. We are thankful to you, Hashem, for every drop. But say, can you imagine having hakaras hatov to the Ribono Shel Olam for every drop of rain, right? Any given rainfall, the hodah, not just for rain, but the hodah for every single drop. Rabbi Yochanan Mesayim Bahachi, Rabbi Yochanan would conclude the bracha in the following way: Ilu pinu mali shira kayam. Even if our mouths were filled with praise, like water, like there is water in the sea, u'lishalinu rina kamon galav, and our tongues were filled with praise, like the waves of the ocean. Eina nachnu masbikim. There would not be enough words to thank you, Hashem. Ad kel ya'azvenu. Ad al ya'azvenu rachamecha Hashem Elokeinu v'lo azavunu. And so again, we conclude the bracha with, please, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, do not allow your mercy to leave us, and we will not leave you. V'lo azavunu. Baruch rov hodaos. Blessed are you, Hashem, who is the giver or the bestower of the rov hodaos. Now, literally again, so rov hados means the majority of thanksgivings. So rov hados la kol hados. I don't understand. They only give HaKadosh Baruch Hu the majority of thanks, not all of thanks. Amarava ema el hados. Rather say it, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who is the one who deserves all thanksgiving. Amar Papa. Papa says, therefore, hilchach top of Zion nemrinhu litarvaihu. Say both of these endings. Elodos, Verov Haodos. Good. So therefore, conclude the bracha with both. So we'll say, this is very interesting. So if you look at Rashi says over here, Lamerno L'Tarvayu, Baruch Atah Berov Haodos, B'marbas Haodos, Akel Shal Kol Elodos Mashav. So we'll say, so you see over here something very interesting. So Rashi began by telling us that we're talking about the bracha of Atov HaMeitiv. What's the problem with Rashi's approach? What's the problem? Gemara makes no mention of Hatov HaMeitiv. So we'll say, so it turns out the Gemara is not talking about Hatov HaMeitiv at all. The Gemara is talking about this bracha over rain. Now, who's ever heard of this bracha over rain, and when is it made? So I want to share with you something amazing. The Shulchan Aruch quotes this Gemara. This is in Arach Chaim, Siman Reish Chaf Aleph. So listen to the context of the bracha. Reish Chaf Aleph, Sif Aleph and Beis. Im hayu b'tzar machmas atziras gishamin. If ultimately, again, so we'll say, remember again, according to the Shulchan Aruch, the context of this Gemara is, it hasn't rained. It hasn't rained. And therefore, again, hayu b'tzar, we were in a state of existential angst, not just existential, actual angst, because it has not rained. V'yardu gishamim, and then it rained, mivarchim. Did I skip over here? I don't think I explained the first part of the Gemara. Did I read that line? No. Okay, I'm sorry. So I'll say, sorry, that's the best part of the Gemara. Right? So when do you go ahead and begin to make the bracha? Literally, again, when it rains enough that the chassan comes to greet the kala. What's the image you're about saying? That when it rains enough that, when the water pools, right, and then another drops down from the heavens, so the water that's pooled on the earth jumps up. That's called Mishiyatza Chasan Likras Kala. When the groom goes out to greet the bride, just like by the chuppah, some have the minhag that the chasan who's under the chuppah first comes out of the chuppah to greet the bride. When do you make the bracha over rain? When there's enough rain that when the drop falls down from the sky and it hits the one on the ground, the one from the ground jumps up. So the one on the ground is called the chasan. The one coming down is called the kala. Such a beautiful imagery. So the Shulchan Aruch says over here, the bracha that we're talking about is in a situation where there wasn't rain, there was a drought, there wasn't rain, and now it began to rain. And even though, again, we didn't get all of the necessary rain, it's raining enough that the chasan comes out to greet the kala. Umay mevarich im emo sada. And what's the bracha that a person makes? Modim anachnu lach. Hashem Elokeinu, akol tipa v'tipa shorareta lanu, v'ilu pinu male shira kayam, ad hein heim yodu v'yarachu. So we'll say, interesting if the Shulchan Aruch understands, the bracha that the Gemara just highlighted over here is the bracha you make for a person who doesn't own a field. Because if you own a field, what's the bracha you make? Hatov HaMeitiv. Right? Because Hatov HaMeitiv, that field is going to serve you and it's going to serve others. But if you're living in a time of drought, and now it rained, enough rain that the chasan comes out to greet the kala, this is the bracha you make over the new rainfall. Really quite beautiful. So we'll say the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, incredible Gemaras. A day of rain is greater than resurrection of the dead, even greater than Tchias HaMesim. Dilu Tchias HaMesim letzadikim, because resurrection only occurs for the righteous. Dilu Gishamim bein tzadikim bein l'rishaim. But yet when it rains, everyone benefits from the rain. Isn't that beautiful? Tchias HaMesim is only for the tzadikim. But rain. I always say, it is so important. I have to tell you, just Ma'aseh Shrei Kachaya. It rained yesterday. And after it finished raining, I was so upset and embarrassed. Why? Because I saw the rain, and I didn't even take a moment for a second to stop and to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I said, clearly, I'm not paying attention during the daf, right? Because you could give the shir and still not pay attention to the shir. Right? You always say, right? It's an incredible thing. You see a kol tipa b'tipa. Thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for every drop. It just changes it's supposed to change our total orientation. Now, while it's true that, of course, these discussions are geared towards Eretz Yisrael, that's absolutely true. But at the end of the day, every time it rains, it is direct bracha from the Ribono Shalom, and how much you have to cultivate that sensitivity within ourselves. The day of rain is greater than Tchias HaMesim. Tchias HaMesim only happens for the tzaddikim. Rain happens for everyone. Upligid Rav Yosef. This argues on Rav Yosef. Tamar Rav Yosef, mitoch shishkula kitchias HaMesim, kavua betchias HaMesim. Rav Yosef says that rain is not greater than resurrection. It's what? It's equal to resurrection. The truth is not such a machlokes, right? Whether it's greater or equal, it's still what it's saying is it's still pretty incredible. How do you know that rain is equivalent to resurrection? Because where is rain included? In the bracha of Tchias HaMesim, the bracha of resurrection. Shemona Esrei. Am Rav Yehuda. Kadu Yom HaGeshamim Kiyom Shenitna BaTorah. Incredible, right? The day of rain, a day when it rains, is as great as the day that the Torah was given. Shene Emar Ya'arov Kimatar Likhi. As the pasuk says in Dvarim, literally again, Moshe Rabbeinu saying in Azinu, Yarov Kimatar Lechi, my words will drip like rain. So Moshe Rabbeinu compares Torah to rain. So ve'in lekach ela Torah. Lekach refers to Torah. Shneimar ki lekach tov nasati lochem torasi al tazov. I've given you a good purchase, right? Or a good teaching. Do not forsake my Torah. I will say, what you begin to see, by the way, what's the nature of this connection to Tchias HaMesim, Tchias HaTorah? It's life, right? Remember, Tchias HaMesim, resurrection of the dead, restoration of life. Torah, there is no meaningful life without Torah. I should say, Torah gives us life. Torah gives us life. So the idea being that rain is equated with all of these other life-sustaining items. So the Gemara goes weiter. Rava Amar Yosef Yom Shnit Torah. It's not true. The day of rain is even greater than the day the Torah was given. How so? Shne Amar Ya'arov Kimatar Likhi. Because you also remember again, the pasuk Moshe Rabbeinu says that my words will drip like rain. So the Gemara says something very interesting. The Gemara says, Mi nitla b'mi. So who is, remember, when you're making a comparison, when you compare two things, what do you compare one item to? Havi Omer Katan Nitla Begadol. Well, so generally, when you're making a comparison, you compare something smaller to something greater. So when Moshe Rabbeinu goes ahead and compares Torah to rain, what he's effectively saying is what? Is that rain, a day of rain, is even greater than the day upon which the Torah was given. Incredible. Rava Ramiksiv. Rava goes in and contrasts psukim. He says on one hand, Ya'arov Kimatar Lichi, right, that ultimately the words of Torah will drip off my mouth like rain. Uksiv Tizal Kital Imrasi. And then it says that my words will drip down like dew. So which one is it? Is Torah like rain or is Torah like dew? So we'll say, listen to this incredible Gemara. In Talmud Chacham Hagunhu. So if a person is a Talmud Chacham, a proper Talmud Chacham, then what? Kital. Then it's like dew. Ve'im lav. And ultimately, again, if he's not the proper Talmud Chacham, arfehu kimatar. Ultimately, again, now literally it means the rain will break him. The rain will break him. Right? He will be broken with rain. Now, what does this mean? If you take a look at Rashi, Rashi says over here, Actually, not the Rashi. I'm sorry. Let me take you to the Maharsha. So I'll just read it, so you don't have to turn to it. But the Maharsha says as follows on this Gemara. He says, "In Talmud Chacham Hagunhu Yekital Yelecha Sheino Netzar Umisbakesh LaOlam." So you must remember again. We saw this in yesterday's daf, 2 days ago. The distinction between rain and dew is that rain, sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't, and sometimes it's good, and sometimes it's not. Dew is always good. So essentially, the Maharsha says there are two different types of Talmud Chacham, Talmidei Chachamim. There's a Talmud Chacham whose Torah is like dew. Because it's like dew, it's always needed and always beneficial. And ultimately, again, but there is a Talmud Chacham whose Torah is like rain. And ultimately, again, that Torah, sometimes it's beneficial, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it's not. The Torah, the Gemara highlighting over here, that a person has to be careful who they take as a Rebbe. So I will say the same way that a Rebbe has to be careful who they take as a Talmud, the Talmud has to be careful who they take as a Rebbe, because not every Torah is the right Torah. In other words, the information could be right, but where it's coming from may be a bit problematic. And therefore, again, sometimes Torah, the Talmud Chacham is like dew, sometimes the Talmud Chacham is like rain. We're going to develop this a little bit more. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Tanya, Hayar Rebbe Bina Omer, Kala Osik Batorah Lishma, anyone who goes out and engages in Torah for Torah's sake, Na'asis Lo Samachayim. Torah becomes an elixir of life. Shneemar, Eitz Chayim Hila Machazikim Ba. It is a tree of life for those who hang on to it. Va'omer, Rifos Tilasaracha, Va'omer, Kimotzei Matzah Chayim. V'chala Osik Batorah Shelo Lishma. But if a person Chas V'Shalom goes ahead and learns Torah not for the right sake, then what? Not for the right purpose. Nasislo samhamoves. Torah becomes an elixir of death. Shene'emar ya'arof kimatar likhi ve'in arifa ela hariga. We'll say this is incredible. Ya'arof kimatar likhi. Sometimes my words, arifa literally means to decapitate. So ya'arof kimatar likhi. Sometimes the words of Torah can become a decapitating rain. How do you know that arifa means decapitation? Shene'emar va'arfu sham esa egla benachal. Egla rufa. Egla rufa, the decapitated calf. But say, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, Lishma, kasher tzivani Hashem Elokai, velo kedei lahakros Rebbe. Shabbos say, this is really an incredible yesod, and this is a theme you see in Chazal over and over. This idea that doing things for the right reasons. See, here you see the Gemara telling us, if you learn Torah Lishma, it becomes an elixir of life. You learn Torah Shelo Lishma, it becomes an elixir of death. And I will say, think about this just a moment. It can't be, right? Really? If I learn Torah Shelo Lishma, it's an elixir of death. So what does that mean? It's better not to learn Torah at all than to learn Torah Shelo Lishma. Is that really possible? So we'll say, so the truth is, remember, it also depends who we're talking about over here. If you're talking about the person who is going to be the teacher versus the person who's going to be the student, the theme that the Gemara is going to develop is it's very dangerous to have a Rebbe who does things for kavod. And it's very dangerous to have a teacher who engages in Torah for the wrong reasons. And the reason for that is because not only does he lead himself astray, but he potentially leads his students astray as well. That's where there is a true danger. Because if a person is in a leadership capacity and a person exerts influence and that person is motivated by the wrong intentions, chas v'shalom, there could be a trickle-down effect to that person's constituency as well. That's different than the yachid, right? I'm an individual. So as an individual, sometimes I learn Torah Shelo Lishma. And the answer is, okay, not great, but a great start. Not a great finish, but a great start, because sometimes in life, we get started with the right things for the wrong reasons. But as long as I'm getting started in the right direction, I'm in a good place. Okay, I know I have to refine it. I know I have to elevate it. But lamaisa, better to do a good thing for the wrong reasons than not to do a good thing at all. That's on an individual level. On a leadership level, a person has to be so careful. Because if my intentions in a leadership capacity are skewed, then chas v'shalom, those crooked hashkafas, right, and those wrong mindsets could chas v'shalom be passed down to those who are learning from me as well. So an incredible dialectic here. Rabbi Zera, Lei Semar, listening. So this is Rabbi Meir said to Rabbi Zera, teach me something. So Amar Lei Chalosh Li Bai V'Lo Yacholna. I'm tired, right? Literally means I'm weakened, I can't. So the Gemara says, so he says, fine. Leima mar milsa da agarata. This is such a great exchange. Right? Rabbi Yirmiyah says to Rabbi Zera, Rabbi, teach me a halacha. Rabbi Zera says, I'm weak. He says, fine. Tell me some good agarata. So he says, fine. I'm Rabbi Yochanan. My dichsiv, this is so beautiful. My dichsiv, ki adam eitz hasadeh. I will say, by the way, I just want to point out, just before we go on, the concluding piece, on an individual level, always better to do something shalol lishma than to do it not at all. That is halacha l'maisa, right? Halacha life l'maisa, because too many times in life we become purists in our intentions, right? I'm only going to do this if I can do it perfectly. I'm only going to do this if I can do this, right? Purists are the enemy of accomplishment. Right? Purists do absolutely nothing but think about what they're going to do and never end up doing anything. If you're a purist, you could accomplish nothing in life. So I just want to point out, on an individual level, if you're doing something and it's good and it's shalom l'shma, keep doing it. Just work on yourself to be able to do it a little bit better. Again, when Chazal are cautioning us against shalom l'shma, what they're worried about is the leader, right? Is the Rebbe who's doing that. That's when there may be a danger. And even the Rebbe sometimes has to continue doing it shalom l'shma because at least he's trying to do something good. Again, person should never take from here that Chazal are telling me if I can't do it perfectly, I shouldn't do it at all, right? Our favorite, right, quote from Voltaire, right? The enemy is the perfect of the good, right? So that we never apply a purist mentality to anything in Ruchnius. Okay, weiter. So Ki Adam Eis HaSoda. I'm sorry? Right, correct. There's also Shalom Lishma Balishma, right? Absolutely. So we go weiter. Rabbi Yochanan. What does it mean when the pasuk says, because a man is a tree of the field? What does that mean? A person is a tree of the field doesn't make any sense. I will say, just by the context over here, the Parshas Kisei, when you go out to war, the Torah says you're not allowed to cut down fruit trees. Right? In other words, if you have to cut it down for strategic purposes, you can. But just like wanton, unnecessary destruction, you're not allowed to engage in. So the pasuk, the pasuk is why can't you destroy trees? Because ultimately, is the tree a combatant? That's the pasuk. It's an interrogation. It's a question. It's a rhetorical question. Is the tree a combatant that you have to cut down the tree? But we darshan this. What does it mean? There's a person a tree. So the Gemara says, El mishum d'chsiv. Because the pasuk says you shouldn't cut down the tree because you'll eat from the fruit. Oksiv oso sashchis v'charasa. But yet elsewhere the pasuk says that if in the course of war you need to cut down trees, you can do so. So haketzad. So we'll say, how do you reconcile these ideas? So we'll say, listen to this. So the Gemara, of course, is understanding that the tree is a metaphor for man. Ki adam eitz hasada. Man is like a tree. Man is like a tree. But it happens to be the metaphor is a beautiful one. Because what does a tree have? A tree has two things. A tree has roots and a tree has upward growth. Actually, three things. Roots, upward growth, and fruit. Right? The roots, of course, representing where we came from. The upward growth representing what we're going to accomplish as individuals. And the fruit, Emir Hashem, the peiros, the actual fruit of our accomplishments. What we've produced, what we've created in this world. So the Gemara says something amazing. I will say if a person is an appropriate Talmud Chacham, eat of his fruit. Don't destroy him. And if he's not a proper Talmud Chacham, also sashchis v'karasa. Ultimately, again, destroy. I will say Torah is not telling us to destroy anyone. Right? The Gemara says, right, I want to go on the record. Don't destroy anyone, even if they're not a Talmud Chacham Hagun. What the Gemara is saying once again is, let's say this is incredible. You have to be careful who you learn from. Okay? It's incredible. We don't really think about this, but the same way that the Rebbe has to be discerning in his Talmidim, so Talmidim have to be discerning who's their Rebbe, right? Who's your Rebbe, right? Who are you going to associate yourself with? Who are you going to learn from? And I both say this is not a pasha thing, you know. A lot of people, I include myself with this, a lot of people have a soapbox. It doesn't necessarily mean that you should listen, right? A lot of people have an opportunity to influence, but the Talmidim have to be discerning, So that's what it means. If the Talmud Chacham is Roi, then ultimately, again, listen. If he's not Roi, then probably better to go elsewhere. Rabbi Chama, Rabbi Chanina, Mai Dichsiv, Barzel bebarzel yachad. So we'll say, what does it mean when it says iron on iron together? Lomar, ma barzel ze echad mechade des chavero. We'll say, how do you sharpen iron? You rub it against each other. So af shnei tamidei chachamim mechadedin ze et ze behalacha. So too, two tamidei chachamim sharpen each other in halacha. So we'll say, so again, I want to point out, it's not just Talmidei Chachamim, this is also the power of learning b'chavrusa, right? That when you go ahead and you learn, right? We all know this, you learn by yourself, you make a mistake, all you do is what? Reinforce that mistake, right? Keep going, make a mistake, and you keep on reinforcing it. Learn b'chavrusa, there's the ability to sharpen each other through learning. Amar Rabbi Baruch Hana, lama nimshalu divrei Torah keish. Why are the words of Torah compared to fire? Shnemar, halo kol dvarika eish no Hashem, lomar alecha, ma eish eno dolik yechidi, af divrei Torah ein miskayim yechidi. So this is very beautiful. Everyone knows that if you want to start a fire, ultimately, again, you need more than one piece of wood to start a real fire. So ultimately, again, so too, to start a fire of Torah, you need two people. You can't create a real fire on your own. You have to have a chavrusa. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. And we'll say, the Lashon over here is, by the way, it's not that you can't learn. You can learn on your own. If you look at Lashon of the Gemara, it's ein divrei Torah, af divrei Torah ein miskaimim biyachid. Right? To both say this, it's not about learning. Miskaimim. Miskaimim means what? Established, upheld. And I will say this is part of the power, by the way, of also being in a shir. Right? To being in a shir, of being in a group. That when you are part of a group, you're part of a collective. So again, there's an opportunity to learn from others. There's an opportunity to review with others. There's an opportunity to talk it out with others. Of course, is it good if I can learn by myself? Sometimes we don't have a choice. Right? So of course, Torah is Torah. And if you have to learn by yourself, learn by yourself. But if you have the opportunity to learn with a chavrus, you have an opportunity to learn with a chabura, you have an opportunity to be part of a shir, then ultimately, again, there's a greater kiyum, there's a greater establishment, there's a greater growth in Torah when you're doing it as part of a collective. So the Gemara goes right there. Right, I will say, what does it mean ultimately again? I'm sorry. Means a sword will come upon the enemies of Talmidei Chachamim, she'oskin bad bebad. And I will say over here, the enemies of Talmidei Chachamim are those who go ahead, are Jews. Right? Anytime you see this expression, it's always a metaphor. Right? Who are the enemies of the Talmidei Chachamim? Those who learn Torah by themselves, who learn Torah alone. So it's interesting. Again, the Gemara using very strong lashon to highlight this idea that the power of Torah is accomplished in numbers. It's not accomplished by yourself. Again, if a person has to learn by themselves, that's what they do. But true growth and true excellence in Torah comes with a chavrusa, or ultimately, again, comes from being part of a collective. So the Gemara goes weiter. None of that percentage, when you learn by yourself, you actually become foolish. Shneimar vino alu. Furthermore, learning by yourself could lead to sin. So I'll say again, the Gemara sometimes employs a bit, it's not hyperbole, but again, it's all based on the same idea. When I learn by myself and I make mistakes, I have the ability to go ahead and reinforce those things. You have to understand also, we live in such a different time, because think about this for just a moment. A person learns by themselves. Okay, so Baruch Hashem, a person has Art Scroll, right? The person has Safaria, right? The person has all of these different tools, so you can actually know what you're talking about, even if you're learning by yourself, which is like an incredible time in which we live. From Chazal's perspective, a person is learning by themselves. You translate a line Gemara in a certain way. How do you know you're right? Right? How do you know you're correct? How do you know you're correct? You translate a halach and Shulchan Aruch a certain way. How do you know you're correct? See, if you have a chavrusa, or if you're learning in a shir, so ultimately, again, if you make a mistake, your chavrusa will jump on you. Someone in the shir will call you out on it. But if you're learning by yourself, you just simply reinforce. That's why Chazal say, you make mistakes. you become foolish. Sometimes you have to have such a profound appreciation for the times in which we are living in. Amrav Nachman Yitzchak. We'll say, let's go back there. Lama nimshalu divrei Torah ke'etz. Why is Torah? Why are the words of Torah compared to a tree? Shenemar itz chayim hi lamachazikim ba. It is a tree of life to those who cling to it. Lomar lecha ma itz katan. How beautiful this is. Ma itz katan madlik es hagadol. Right, just like a small tree, a small piece of wood has the ability to ignite a large piece of wood. Af tamidei chachamim kitanim mechadedin es hagedolim. So too, smaller tamidei chachamim have the ability to sharpen larger tamidei chachamim. We'll say such a beautiful idea. So Torah is compared to a tree because again, just like by a tree, ma'itz katan, a small piece of wood could ignite a larger piece of wood. So too, smaller Talmidei Chachamim, called lesser Talmidei Chachamim, could go ahead and sharpen greater Talmidei Chachamim. We'll say a beautiful Gemara. V'hainu dam Rabbi Chanina. This is what Rabbi Chanina always used to say. Harbe lamadati merabosai. I learned a lot from my teachers. Ome chaverai yosem merabosai. More from my teachers, I learned from my friends. Let's say, isn't that incredible? More from my teachers, I learned from my friends. Omi tamidai yosem mikulan. But the most I learned was from my Talmidim. The most I learned was from my Talmidim. And I will say, this is a fascinating Gemara because, of course, it's a beautiful idea. It's a beautiful idea. But Lamaisa, what does it mean? Right? I understand the idea. I learned a lot from my teachers. And I even understand the idea. I learned even more from my peers. Because I will say, remember, this goes back to what the Gemara just said before. The goal in life is you have your chavrusa, you have your chabura, you have your shir, you have a group that you're a part of. And when you go out and you're part of a group, you learn so much from others. But what does it mean? More than anything, more than my teachers, more than my peers, I learned from my students. So I say, is that actually true? Right? Is there a Rebbe like that who could actually say, I learned more from my students than I learned from my Rebbe? So I'll share with you an incredible idea by the Degel Machan Efraim. Listen to what he says. What's the pshat? He says, HaTorah nimshal l'ma'ayan. Torah is compared to a well. So how does a well work? Ma ma'ayan komasha dolin mimenu yoser, hamayim miskabim yoser. So I will say, a well, the more you draw out of it, what happens? The more water comes from the subterranean spring. Right? So the more you pull out of the well, the more you draw from the well, the more water comes into the well. So Degel Machane Ephraim says, Kach harav hamora, kol ma shemelamid yoser, no sein Hashem belibo lahavin yoser. What does it mean when Rabbi Yochanan says that I learned the most from my Talmid? Rabbi Yochanan was saying is, I've come to learn in life, the more I give, the more I get. It's not the pshat that I learned more information from my students, but because I had students and I had the opportunity to constantly give, I got so much. Because a person is like a well, and inside of me I have these waters. And the more I share of my waters with others, the more waters are replaced by my spiritual subterranean spring. So that's the Degel Machaneh Ephraim Zimir Rabbi Yochanan's idea. I learned a lot from my teachers. I learned even more from my peers, from my contemporaries. But the truth is, the most I learned was from my students. Not because my students taught me anything. Well, I'm sure they taught me things. But because at the end of the day, because the more I was able to give to them, the more water of me, of my personal story that I shared with them, the more waters I was able to receive. We'll say, what an incredible metaphor, not just for the Rebbe teaching the Talmidim, but in life. We often think that what we give to others means less for us. But it's pashut not true. The more you give, the more you get. This is true when it comes to tzedakah. It's true when it comes to chesed. It's true when it comes to time. It's true when it comes to koach. We often think, when we give, we make a cheshbon, right? Okay, I'm going to give. But I recognize that it's important to give, it's good to give, but l'maisa, there's less for me. There's less money for me, there's less time for me, there's less koach for me. And Rabbi Yochanan says there could be nothing further from the truth. Whatever you give from your well, whatever waters you give, your monetary well, your skill well, your time well, whatever you give, that just makes more room for more waters to come. The more you give in life, the more you get. Such an incredible yisod. Let's go weiter. Says Degel Machana Efraim. Says the Gemara. Rabbi Chanina bar Papa. Rami Ksiv. Likras Sameh Hesayumayim. So it's a very interesting Gemara over here. One pasuk says that bring water to the one who is thirsty. Likras Sameh Hesayumayim. Ksiv. Hai Kol Sameh Luchulamayim. Then it says to the thirsty person, go to the water. So we'll say, which one is it? Do you bring water to the thirsty person, or do you tell the thirsty person to go to the water? So it depends. Im Talmid Chacham hu likras sameh sayumayim, ve'im lav hay kol sameh luchulamayim. So we'll say, look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi in Talmid Chacham hagun hu sherotze lilmod mimcha, sherotze lelame mimcha, mitzav lerav leilech etzlo bimkomo. So let's listen to this. So this is talking to the Rebbe. If the student who wants to learn from you is worthy, bring the water to him. If the student who wants to learn from you is not so worthy, let the student come to you. So Rabbi say, this is incredible. According to Rashi, this Gemara is not talking to the Talmud. This Gemara is talking to the Rebbe. The Rebbe is the one who has the waters, right? He has the waters. So the shaila is in life. Do you take the water to the thirsty person, or should the thirsty person come to you? Should the Rebbe go to the Talmud, or should the Talmud go to the Rebbe? And the Gemara says it depends. If it's a really worthy, truly thirsty, right? Truly thirsty Talmud, bring the water to him. But if again, not so sure if it's so worthy, let him come and seek out the water. In other words, if the Talmud is not on the level that his worthiness has been proven, let him prove his worthiness by seeking out the water. But if the Rebbe sees that the Talmud is genuine and true, bring the water to him. Make Torah accessible. Make Torah easy. Bring the Torah to him. If you see that he really wants it, bring the Torah to the thirsty person. Such an incredible yisod. Let's say, so as I'll just tell you just as an aside, and then we really have to go right there. Let's start. Say, we just started in the shul now. We have an interpreter by all of the shiurim. Sign language interpreter. And it's been incredible to see what has happened. Right? The response from the deaf community has been that they never had access to Torah like this before. Right? Never. A woman came over to me after my shir, after I started a women's tefillah shir on Wednesday mornings. She came over to me and she said, I'm X number of years old. She said, I've never had a rabbi in my life. I said, will you be my rabbi? So I said, you don't realize that sometimes we have an obligation to bring Torah to people. And sometimes it's just easy enough. Again, I wish I could say I could take credit for her idea. This is Mrs. Esther Resnick. This is her idea. She does it every single shir. It's an incredible thing. There are people who are so thirsty. And because they're so thirsty, it is our job to go ahead and bring Torah to them. So maybe it's someone in your life who is not learning, but if you were to offer them a 15-minute chavrus a week, maybe they would learn. Bring Torah to people. Sometimes we say, that's not me. You know what? I'll wait for the person to ask me. If you see someone, we all have someone in our lives who is thirsty. Bring the Torah to them. Because there are people, throngs and throngs of beautiful neshamas who are so thirsty, some of them don't even know that they're actually thirsty yet. And it's our job, those of us who have tasted of the sweet waters of Torah, of the restorative waters of Torah, to bring those waters to those who truly want it. Incredible Gemara. Let's go weiter. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Chanina bar Chama Rami Ksiv, Yafutzu ma'anasecha chutza. The pasuk says, "Let your well springs extend outward." Ksiv yulecha levadcha. Then it says it should be for you alone. So which one is it? Right? Is Torah ultimately again something to be shared or something to be kept privately? Im tamid chacham hagunhu yafutzu ma'anasecha chutza. V'im lav yulecha levadcha. So it's interesting. So the Torah says as follows. The Torah says that at the end of the day, the Talmud Chacham is hagun, and an appropriate Talmud Chacham, his waters will spread. If he's not such an appropriate Talmud Chacham, do me a favor. Keep it to yourself, right? Keep it to yourself. The Gemara goes weiter. Rabbi Chanina bar Idi. So, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Lami nimshlu divrei Torah l'mayim. We'll say this is how beautiful this is. Why is Torah compared to water? So, Dichsiv hay kol tzamei lechu l'mayim. Lomar lecha. First of the widest lines. We'll say, get ready for this. Ma mayim manichin makom gavo v'hochel makom namoch. After divrei Torah im miskaymin ela b'misha daito shefela. We'll say, what's the unique quality of water? Water always travels down to the lowest point. So, to Torah could only really be found with those who are humble. I will say humility is a prerequisite for spiritual greatness. That's why water is compared to Torah. So beautiful. Say this is incredible. Why is Torah compared to three liquids? right? B'mayim, b'yayin, u'b'chalav. Torah is compared to wine, to water, wine, and milk. Tichsiv, hay kol tzami l'chu l'mayim, uksiv l'chu shivru v'ichlu, v'l'chu shivru b'lo kesef, u'b'lo mechir yayin v'chalav. So we'll say, why is Torah compared to these three liquids? Lomar l'cha to teach me, ma mashkin halalo emis kaina ela b'pacho shebekelim, after Torah emis kaina ela b'misha daito sheba. We'll say, get ready for this. What's come denominator between wine, oil, and water? Wine, milk, and water, right? Is that in order to store them, you store them in earthenware vessels. Earthenware vessels are considered to be, right, the most base, humble vessels. Just like wine, milk, and water can only be stored in earthenware vessels, so too Torah can only be stored in a vessel of humility. If a person is not humble and a person thinks, I know everything, there's nothing more to teach me, I know better, then ultimately, again, they will never, you could learn information, but you'll never become a Talmud Chacham, and Torah will never really have the desired impact on you. Humility is a prerequisite for growth in Torah. Both listen to this Maisa. Get ready for this story. The daughter of the Caesar had the following conversation with Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya. She said to him, daughter of the Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, how could such beautiful wisdom be stored in such an ugly utensil? Right? Good morning, right? So apparently Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya was not a very handsome man, or at least the wife of the Caesar did not think that he was, the daughter of the Caesar did not think that he was a very handsome man. So she said, I don't understand how someone so wise, because you must also remember again, this is coming from the Greeks, right? From the Romans, remember again, so where the physical aesthetic was everything. So she could not understand how someone so wise could be so ugly. So Amarla, Avicha Ramichan Rabamani de Parcha. So he said to her, tell me, where does your father keeps his wine, right? His best wines in earthenware utensils, right? Amrle, yeah, she said, of course, Ela b'mayim near me. So she said, well, what else should we keep it in? Amrla, asun de chashibasu ramu b'mani daba v'kaspa. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya says, look, you're the Caesar. Your family is a Caesar. Really, why would you be keeping your wine in earthenware vessels? Should you not be keeping it in vessels of gold, vessels of silver, befitting your stature in life? So she went to her father. She said, Father, I have a great idea. We should really store our wine in utensils of gold and silver. So her father listened. And ultimately, again, the wine spoiled. All the wine spoiled. Asu va'amrula, amrulei, amrula, I'm sorry, asu va'amrulei, amrula lebarte, man amrula chahachi. So the Caesar goes, right, they told the Caesar, all the wine spoiled. Caesar went to his daughter, Nu, who told you this idea? So amrulei Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya. So the Caesar's daughter said, it was Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya who gave me this idea. Karyuho, amrulei amai amras lahachi. They called him Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya. Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, why did you give my daughter this idea? To put the wine in the golden vessels. Amar lei, Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya responded to the Caesar, Ki da amra li, amra la. I just said to her the same thing that she said to me. She said to me, how could so much beautiful wisdom be stored in such an ugly utensil? So I told her, go ahead, go see for yourself. Go try to store your precious wine, your best wines, in a golden utensil and see what happens. So I will say, isn't this an incredible idea? So Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya is saying that sometimes, in order to preserve something beautiful, you can only preserve it in the most humble of utensils, right? So the best wine can't be stored. I will say, by the way, in all seriousness, isn't it an interesting thing? You could take the best wine, and put it into the most expensive silver becher, right? And all of us know, not going to taste the same, right? Though you do something to the wine, and yet you could take an ordinary glass, ordinary drinking glass, and isn't it incredible? Your good bottle of wine. I learned this from my wine Rebbe, who's Menachem Schoenfeld. Right? So everybody, you have to have a Rebbe. So right? Isn't it incredible? You could go ahead, you could take the wine and put it into your ordinary glass, your drinking glass, and it tastes better than if you put it in the most expensive silver becher. That's Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya. At the end of the day, Torah is only miskayim. It only endures if it is housed in a vessel of humility. They both say who we are is the prerequisite for what we accomplish. If you want growth in spirituality, you have to be an earthenware vessel. Humility is the which I will say, by the way, I just want to tell you something. It's so pashut. It's so pashut. Why? Because humility is the midah that says, I don't know everything. I don't know everything. I don't know everything. So if a person doesn't have the midah of humility, then spirituality becomes an exercise in futility, because you won't learn anything, you won't accept anything, and you already think you know better than anything and everyone else. So without humility, without taking the approach of I am a personalistic earthenware vessel, then Torah doesn't have an impact. There's nowhere for me to grow. First step in spiritual development, become an earthenware vessel of humility. But there are handsome people, are Talmidei Chachamim. In other words, not every Talmud Chacham is difficult to look at. In other words, right, so there are people who seem to have both. I will say this is incredible. The Gemara says, "Ihavisani tfei havu gemiri." Right? Ihavusanu, I should say, Ihavusanu tfei havu gemiri. Ultimately, again, if they weren't handsome, they'd be even greater Talmidei Chachamim. Right? So I will say, so what does this mean? If you go back to just, I'm going to offer just a moment, Tosus, last Tosus, Ihavusanu havu chachimi tfei perish im hayusonim hayofi havu Talmidei Chacham biyoser. The Rebbe says actually an interesting idea. What the Gemara is saying is as follows: a person who is a good-looking person, by definition, has a certain element of gaiva associated with them. And that is, the Gemara seems to feel that's an inescapable reality. Right? If a person knows that they're handsome, a person knows that they're beautiful, there's a certain element of gaiva that comes with that. It's almost like an inescapable reality. So the Gemara says, are there Talmidei Chacham who are handsome? Absolutely, absolutely. But if they were able to go ahead and reject the vanity, the inherent vanity, that beauty, that handsomeness comes with, they would even be greater Talmidei Chacham. And I was supposed to say, the reality is, all of us have inherent challenges to our spiritual growth. So sometimes it's our midos, and sometimes it's our appearance, right? So that's just the reality. So Rabbi Shimon Chanani is saying, can you be a Talmid Chacham who's handsome or is beautiful? Absolutely. But just understand, if you're handsome, there's an additional element of gaiva that a person has to fight back against. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, Davar Acher, Shabbos says it's beautiful. Why is Torah compared to wine, milk, and water? This is incredible. Shabbos say, here's what's interesting. Right? Wine, water, and milk become disqualified. When we say become disqualified, in other words, they can become compromised with Hesach Hadas. Look at Rashi. Rashi says, Hesach Hadas means a lapse of awareness. Shimlo Yishmereim Yafeh. If you don't watch these liquids carefully, you nishpachin o nofel esok davar. What could happen? They could easily spill, or some impurities could come in and totally ruin them. See, I both say this is different, let's say, than oil and honey. Watch this. See, oil and honey, if an impurity falls into it, what happens? What happens? It's fine because it doesn't sink, right? It could stay at the top, and ultimately you could just scoop it out. Wine, water, oil, easily spill. And if impurity gets mixed in, it's generally difficult to go ahead and siphon out or get out the impurity. Usually you just lose the entire liquid. So just like these liquids are easily lost with Hesach Hadas, with a lapse of awareness, so too again, Af Divrei Torah im mishtachachin ela b'Hesach Hadas. I will say this is absolutely incredible. What is the greatest existential danger to the spirituality of the Jew? See, if you ask most people, they'll answer, sin. Sin is not the greatest existential danger. For one simple reason, we all sin. We all sin. It's just a question of how often, right? Frequency and intensity, right? But we all sin, and we all do it well, and we all do it often. That is the reality of life. The greatest existential danger to Ruchnius, Rabbi say, is Hesach Hadas, is when we have a lapse of awareness, when we fall asleep at the wheel of life, when I lose my direction, when I don't know where I'm going or what I'm doing, and I kind of put on the cruise control and just keep going. I will say, this is the Ramchal, right? The Ramchal in the opening chapter of Mesilas Yesharim, the first chapter of Mesilas Yesharim, the first thing he discusses is Zehirus. Zehirus means awareness. The most important midah in successful spiritual living is to live with constant awareness. Who am I? What am I? Where am I going? What am I doing? Is this thing I'm about to do, does it advance my life agenda, derail my life agenda? Zihirus. And the moment I don't have zihirus, I have hesach hadas, there's a lapse of awareness. And says the Gemara, the moment there's a lapse of awareness, that's like the impurities that fall into your milk. Done. That's how you get, it's not sin that derails us. It's hesach hadas. It's lapse of awareness, lapse of attentiveness in life. That's what derails us. Incredible. We're starting 4:30 for now on, by the way. I'm just telling you. Rabbi Chanina. Gadol Yom HaGeshamim, Ki Yom Shenivru Shamayim Va'aretz. Right? Both back to rain. Right? Ultimately, again, the day of rain is as great as the day that the heavens were created. Right? Heavens and the earth were created. Shnei Amar Harifu Shamayim Mimal Ushechakim Yizlu Tzedek Tiftach Aretz V'Yifru V'Yeshat Tzedakah Tatzmiach Yachad. Ani Hashem Berasiv Berasim Lo Ne'amar Ella Berasiv. Good. Amar Boshia. Gadol Yom HaGeshamim. Right? The day of rain is great. Shafilu Yeshua Para Uravabo. We'll say even salvation is intensified during a day of rain. Shnei Amar Tiftach Eretz V'Yifru Yesha. Amar Rabbi Tanchum Bar Chani Loi Eina Gesham Yardim Ela Imke Nimchalu Avonoseim Shal Yisrael. So I will say, this goes back to the theme we've seen a number of times already, that rain is a spiritual barometer. Right? A spiritual barometer. That it only rains if we are deserving of it. Conversely, but the way we've started is, it doesn't rain if we're not worthy. If we're unworthy, it doesn't rain. So the Gemara says something amazing. So the Gemara says, it only rains if the sins of the Jewish people have been forgiven. Shnei Amar, the Gemara quotes the pasuk from Tilim, Ratzisa Hashem Artzecha, Shavta Shevis Yaakov. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Shavta Shevis Yaakov, Nasasa Avon. Oh, I'm sorry, I just skipped. Ratzisa Hashem Artzecha Shevis Yaakov. Nasasa Avon Amecha, Kisisa Kol Chatasam Sela. Amar le Zeiri medehivas l'Ravina. So Zeiri from Diva said to Ravina, Asun lehacha. You learn that from there. Masnisula anan mehacha masnisula. We learn that from here. The Ata, quoting over here the Gemara, the pasuk from Melachim. The Ata tishma shamayim v'salachta lachatos. Amar Rabbi Tanchum Breid Rabbi Chia. So we'll say so again. The Psukim highlighting this idea that when it rains, that is a sign that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has forgiven our averos. Amar Rabbi Tanchum Breid Rabbi Chia. Ish kfar ako ein hageshamim ne'etzarim ela imkein nischayvu son ehen shal Yisrael kehilla. Rain is only withheld if the sinners are deserving of destruction. So I will say once again, this is just the negative articulation of the previous concept. Beforehand we said rain only falls if the sins of the Jewish people have been forgiven. Here ultimately rain is withheld. Rain is withheld literally again if the enemies of the Jewish people deserve destruction. Enemies of the Jewish people, of course, is a reference to what? Am Yisrael, Jews who sin. Shnei Amar. Gebar over here quotes the pasuk. Tzia gam chom yigzelu meme shaleg sha'ol chato. So I'll say, so ultimately again the way the Gemara is dashing the pasuk over here is it's dry, right? The heat and the dryness will steal the waters of the snow shel chato because their sins come from the depth. So the idea being that sin steals the water, steals the snow. You learn it from there. Pasuk says, Kadosh Baruch Hu will withhold the heavens, withhold the rain from the heavens, and ultimately you will be lost quickly. This is fascinating. Rain is only withheld because Klal Yisrael does not properly perform the mitzvos of Trumas and Maestros, separating tithes. Shnei Amar, Tzia gam chom yigzelu meme shaleg. My mashma, how do we learn that from that pasuk? Turn to Shmuel. B'shvil dvarim shetzivisi eschem b'mos hachama v'lo asisim. Yigzelu mikem meme shaleg b'mos hagisham. Because of the things that I commanded you to do during the summertime, and you did not do them. They will say, what are the things commanded during the summertime? That's tithing. Because when does Trumas and Maestros take place? They will say, B'pashtos, when you're harvesting. When does the harvest take place? Spring, summer. Right? So because you did not do the things that I asked you to do during the spring, summer, i.e. separate out your tithes, therefore I will steal back your rains, steal back your snow from you. Wow. Rain is withheld, Rabbi say, why? Ultimately, again, because of those who speak Lashon Hara. Shnei Amar, quotes over the pasuk, Rach tzafon techula geshem, upanim nizamim lashon sasar. So Rabbi say, literally it means the northerly wind will prevent rain. Upanu nezam, angry, literally an angry face, lashon sasar. So we'll say the Gemara Darshan lashon sasar means literally again because of words spoken in private. Right? What are the words spoken in private? Or I should say destructive words. Destructive words. A reference to lashon hara. Incredible. I would also, I just want to point out, I'm not doing this justice. Each of these drashas, right, deserve a sheer unto themselves. But what you begin to see, I will say, I just want to point out, there is a overarching lesson that is also to be understood over here, which is the lesson of cause and effect. What we do has an impact, and everything we do has an impact, and has an impact indirectly, but also has an impact directly. That's what Chazal are trying to teach us. What's going to happen with the rain? That's directly related to how you behave, right? How I behave, how I talk, how I learn, how I conduct myself is manifest in the way that the natural world reacts towards me. This is the takeaway message. We often do things or don't do things because we think our actions don't matter. Everything matters. The Gemara goes weiter. Amar of Sala, Amar of Hamnuna. Incredible. Wow. Rain is only withheld. We'll say, Azei Panim is one of these interesting words. Most of us know it, usually because we've been called it by someone, right? Either a parent or a Rebbe, Azas Panim, right? So it's happened. And it's one of those words that kind of, when you hear it, you know exactly what it means, right? The way we translate it is brazen. Brazen. I both say what it really refers to over here is arrogance, right? Brazenness is really arrogance. So the Gemara says rain is withheld because of widespread arrogance, brazenness. Shnei Amar quotes over here the pasuk from Yirmiyah, Vayimanu revivim umalkosh lohaya umeitzach isha zona hayalach me'ante kalem. So literally again, Chashbaruch says, I held back the rains. Why? Because meitzach isha zona, you have the forehead of a harlot. Okay, right? What does it mean? The forehead. So I say, so the assumption is that the zona, the harlot, is brazen. Right? There's a brazenness in the way that she behaves, in the fact that she's willing to engage in this behavior, and everyone knows that she engages in this behavior. So the Navi compares Klal Yisrael to the harlot. You have the brazenness of a harlot, and because of that brazenness, I've withheld the rain. So the Gemara goes right there. So Amrav Sala, Amrav Hamnuna, Kol Adam Shishla Azos Panim. We'll say, get ready for this. Any person who has this brazenness, Sof Nechshal Ba'avera. Ultimately, again, will get caught up in immorality. Shene'amar umeitzach isha zona hayalach. I will say, what's the pshat? It's a very simple cheshbon. See, I will say, when a person is brazen, a person is arrogant. Arrogant people feel that they are entitled to everything. So if I feel that I'm entitled, if I live life with an entitlement, it's only a matter of time that I go ahead and engage in immorality. For one simple reason, I feel I'm entitled to whatever I want. So a person will engage in financial inappropriateness because I feel I'm entitled to whatever I want. Immorality, I feel that I'm entitled to whatever I want. Shenemar hayelacha v'lo nemar yelacha. Amar Rabba Barafuna kol adam sheyesh lo azos panim. But listen to this. Any person who has this brazenness, mutar likroso rasha. You're allowed to call such a person a rasha. Shenemar ha'iz ha'ish rasha b'fanav. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak amar mutar l'sanoso. You are permitted to hate a brazen person. Such a strong lashon. You're permitted to despise the Baal Gaiva, the person who's brazen. Shnei Amar va'az panav yisuna al tikri yishuna ella yisane. Amar Rav Katina ina gesham ne'atzarim ella b'shel bittul Torah. So Rav Katina says rain is withheld. Why? Bittul Torah. Bittul Torah, because I will say negation of Torah learning. Shnei Amar quotes over here the pasuk from Koheles. So the Gemara says, Bishvil Atzlos. What does it mean by Atzal Tayim? The Gemara is making a drasha. Atzal Tayim is Atzlos, right? Because of the laziness. Shai B'Yisrael, Shalo Asku Batorah, V'na'aseh Sono Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because of the laziness of Klal Yisrael, they did not engage in Torah learning, and as a result became the enemy of the Jew of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ve'ein mach ela ani. A mach means a pauper. Shnei Amar ve'ein machu me'erkicha. Ve'ein mikra ela HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shnei Amar mekare mayim ba'ali Yosef. Rav Yosef ar mehacha v'ata. So Rav Yosef quotes a different pasuk. V'ata lo ro'u or bahirhu bashchakim v'ruach avra batitarim. Good. Ve'ein or ela Torah or estor. Shnei Amar kiner mitzvah Torah or Baruch b'shchakim Tanei Rishmal. Afilu b'shosh rakia nasa b'horin l'orital umatar ruach avra v'atitarem. So Shmuel says that the punishment for bittul Torah is that even in a time where the sky is filled with clouds, meaning ready to rain, ultimately, again, the wind comes along and disperses the clouds as a result of bittul Torah. Rabbi Ami, Eina Geshem Ne'etzarim Ela Ba'avon Gezel. Why is rain withheld? Rain is only withheld because of theft. Shneimar quotes over here the pasuk. The pasuk from Eov Al Kapayim Kisar Vayitzav Allah b'mafgia. So the Gemara says Ve'ein Kapayim Ela Chamas. Kapayim over here refers to theft. Shneimar u'minachamas asher bekapehem. Ve'ein ar. What's ar in this context? Ela motor, rain. Shneimar yafitz anan oro. Maitakante. So I will say, what should you do? What should you do? Ultimately, again, if you see that rain is withheld because of all of these different things. So the Gemara says, Yarbe betfila. A person ultimately, again, should engage in tefillah. Now, I will say, understand, obviously, if it's theft, the first step is return the stolen items, right? But what it's saying is, how do you change the decree? You change the decree through tefillah. Shneimar, pasuk says over here, Vayitzav alav b'mafgia. Ve'ein pigia ela tefillah. Right? Literally, again, pigia is tefillah. Shneimar, v'ata al tispala ba'ada amazeh. Ultimately, again, the al tifka. All right, so we'll have to stop over here. I'm sorry, I apologize for the speed of the last part. But again, I will say incredible, overwhelming, magnificent daf tomorrow afternoon. It's going to be early. I think daf tomorrow is at 3:30. So you could come and you could bench here, right? Just bench here, right? But I will say, but again, you don't want to miss an incredible, overwhelming, magnificent daf tomorrow. I will say. Baruch. Great to see you. Welcome back. How was your trip?
Excellent.
That's Leah.
Crazy. Yes, it's busy.
Baruch Hashem. Welcome back.